mix. Adding hunger to the equation would be a bit like tossing a stick of dynamite into the interior of my Fiat and hoping for the best. The children were bound to feel uncertain about another move so quickly after the last, and I wanted to do everything I could to lessen their anxiety. It's generally acknowledged that any change in carer should take place as early in the day as possible. That way, the child has a chance to acclimatise to their new surroundings before climbing into an unfamiliar bed. Joan was keen to bring an end to the unexpected placement as well, by all accounts. "She's tearing her hair out," were the actual words the social worker from my placements team used when I spoke to her the day before. Apparently, Joan already had her hands full caring for a baby with neonatal abstinence syndrome, NAS. She had agreed to take the siblings as a favour after the out-of-hours team had been unable to get hold of the foster carer on their emergency rota. Like me, Joan was a short-term or task-based foster carer. Our job is a temporary one, but placements can last anything from 1 night to 4 years. Short-term foster carers support the child from the moment they're removed from home and through the uncertain stage when their birth family is being assessed by the local authority. Once a final judgment has been made by the courts, foster carers help to manage the child's transition either back to their birth family or onto permanency with long-term foster or kinship carers or an adoptive family. At least, being a bank holiday, the roads were free of the usual weekday traffic, and I arrived at Joan's house a little over 10 minutes later. As I walked across her driveway, where a Ford Focus full of child car seats was parked, my eye was drawn by the flicker of a curtain at one of the windows on the second floor. I looked up as I rang the doorbell and caught a glimpse of blonde hair. "Rosie, you're just how I pictured you," Joan said warmly, holding the door open with one hand, the other cradled around a small bump strapped to her chest. Around 60 or so, Joan wore a cheery expression despite the dark circles under her eyes. We had never met before, but knew of each other through a social worker who worked at Bright Heights, the fostering agency I was registered with. I had heard that Joan was a well-respected carer and rarely had a vacancy. "Sounds ominous," I joked, as I wiped my feet on the doormat. Joan smiled and bobbed her way along the hall to the sitting room. It was a routine I'd been through several times before with newborns who were withdrawing from drugs. Babies with substance addiction, known as neonatal abstinence syndrome, often need the constant comfort of a cuddle during their first few weeks of life, because the pain of withdrawal, the jitters, stomach cramps and fever can be intense. The sitting room was cosy, the lights woven around the mantelpiece casting a cheery glow on the peach-coloured walls. There was no sign of the siblings, but distant chatter and a thump overhead suggested they were upstairs. I nodded towards her middle. "You've got a tiny one there." She eased the sling down an inch. I caught a glimpse of dark hair and the tiny curve of a delicate ear before the baby began to squall and Joan was on the move again. 2 weeks old and still only 5 pounds, she said, swinging her shoulders from side to side. "I heard you'd adopted recently. Megan, isn't it? How's she doing?" News travelled with surprising speed around fostering circles. When Megan's adoption was finalised in June 2014, I'd been touched to receive congratulatory cards from lots of foster carers, some of whom I'd only met once or twice. Like Joan's new charge, Megan, now 3.5, had been born addicted to drugs. She suffered painful withdrawal symptoms and was barely out of my arms during her first few weeks of life. Like me, my birth children, Emily and Jamie, then 16 and 13, had grown increasingly attached to her and vice versa. When Megan's social worker suggested that I throw my hat into the ring for assessment as her adopter, I jumped at the chance. "She's a right little pickle," I said, remembering this morning's meltdown over a major misdemeanour of mine, cutting her toast into triangles instead of squares. "But she's our little pickle. We wouldn't be without her now." The pouches beneath Joan's eyes creased as she smiled. "I heard it was touch and go for a while." I blew out some air and nodded. It was true. After being turned down as an adopter for Megan because of safety concerns, her birth family knew where I lived, we went through the difficult process of moving her onto adoptive parents. The placement broke down, and she returned to us a few weeks later. But the move had left its mark. Megan was still fearful of separation, even for short periods. Getting her settled at nursery in September had been a challenge. For the first few weeks, she became so distressed at drop-off.